I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're gonna make a Lego sorter. About 5 years ago, I made this Lego table for my kids, and they were much younger then, and we had far fewer sets to try to fit here. But now you can see that we have an overflowing amount of bricks, and we've got to figure out a better way to store these. Well, we're going to fix the storage problem in an upcoming video, but right now, we have to first figure out a good way to sort them. We have several different bins. This is the biggest one, but not the only one. And to try to separate this out into individual pieces of like kind would be really, really hard. And that's because there's just so many, there's no good place to start. So our first step is actually going to be to take groups of these bricks and separate them by size. And then from there we can individually separate them by type or however you want to organize them. But first we're going to make a sifter to break these down into different sizes. Sifters like this have been available for a long time. I believe Lego has actually sold these before, but basically we're going off the same idea that everybody else has used. There's a stack of different layers, and the holes in the different layers get smaller as they go down. So you dump in a bunch of bricks at the top, the big ones get stuck, the medium ones and the small ones fall down, then the medium ones get stuck and the small ones fall down, and so on and so on. You can break them down by size depending on how many layers you put in here. And recently I saw a really cool implementation of this by a guy named Pete Squared on Instagram. I'll put a link to his video. It's really cool. He did a great job on it. But it gave me the idea to build something like this that hangs on the side of a table rather than a cart that goes on the ground. I started out this idea by making a prototype. I made it out of cardboard and laser cut wood. I made 2 of these pieces with different size holes just to make sure that this whole thing was going to work, because I'd never actually tried it before. So I made a really simple cardboard box wrapped up, cut some slots in it, and then made these pieces so that I could slide them in and get the different separations. So I put this together really quickly and it actually works surprisingly well. Now the problem with this is that all the pieces that fall down get stuck in the middle. There's no way to get those out. The smallest ones fall through the bottom, the big ones are still on the top, but we don't have a way to get the medium ones out of the middle. So when I get to the final design for this thing, I'm gonna need a way to be able to drop or pull out every piece on every level of this entire thing. So I think the idea here is to make something like this that hangs on the side of another work surface. It's kind of a funnel. And then inside that, there's going to be a couple of different pieces with those different size holes in them. And on the outside, there's going to be a wheel. So each one of these can be turned and dumped down into the funnel one at a time. So initially, you'll drop a bunch of bricks down here in the top. The big ones will get stuck, the medium ones will get stuck, the other medium ones will get stuck, and the tiny ones will fall out. And then once you've put a new container underneath, you can turn this knob and dump those. Then you can turn this knob and dump those, so that you can put all of those into individual containers and then work from there. So that drawing is about as far ahead as I have planned, so we're just gonna wing it. I've got the outside shape here kind of going. I don't know if it's going to be the final shape or not, but it's good enough to move ahead. But before I glue all these pieces together, I actually need to drill some holes because I want these pieces to be able to sit down inside there and pivot. Like I said before, I want them to be able to turn from the outside to kind of dump the pieces down further. So first off, I have to design these pieces to fit in this opening, and then I'll have to figure out a good way to make them pivot. Now that I've got this prototype cut, I need to figure out a way to make it pivot on this center point. So I've tried a couple of different things. One, which I'm not going to use, but I think it's totally doable, is to actually use Lego for this. I found this piece this morning, and it is just slightly too small for this material, but you can force it over top of that, which means then you would have a pivot wheel that you could use on the outside. So if you wanted to go this route, you could totally do that, and you wouldn't have to necessarily glue these or attach them. It's just a friction fit. But I don't have enough of these individual pieces, so instead I 3D printed something. So I went into Fusion 360 and quickly modeled up something really simple. It's very easy to do, but basically there's this pin that will go through the wall of this container, and then that goes into a knob that'll be on the outside so that you can spin it. And then on the inside, this little divider will go in there, and you can drive in a small screw to hold this in place, so as you turn the knob on the outside, it will turn this piece on the inside. Now this was extremely easy to model. If you want to learn how to use Fusion 360, we've got an online course that will teach you everything you need to know to get started, so be sure to hit the link down below, go check that out. So this piece was designed before I designed this thing, and so now that I have them fit together, I see that they actually stick out a little bit too far. So I'm going to have to make some modifications to this so that my little holder here can be inset flush with the outside edge, which is not a big deal, and that's why we did this temporarily out of wood. So I'm just going to mark the amount that I need to remove here, go back and recut this piece, and then we can actually try it out. Oh, look at that! Beautiful! Wow, that fit better than I expected. Next up, we're going to drill some holes in these places that I marked and then glue this up into a box, and then we can actually put a couple of these in and test out the rotation. Now we can do a test with these pieces, so I'm just going to run these posts through. Got the holes pretty tight, and that'll stop them from turning when we don't want them to turn, which will be good. And then as long as they're lined up, this should fit right in between them. It looks like the holes are not in the right place. Oh, I know what I did. So I centered the hole on this whole face, not on this interior space. So they're a 1/4 inch off because of the 1/2 inch material on the back. That's unfortunate, but that just means I have to cut some more plywood. Since it's a prototype, not a big deal. These two side panels have to be remade, so I'm gonna recut and re-drill those. But while I'm doing that, we're also gonna have the laser running so that I can have all 3 of these pieces cut out of orange acrylic. I think it's gonna look really cool because the outside of this entire thing is gonna be clear, so you'll be able to look into it and see these turn, see all the pieces fall, all that stuff. So let's get the laser running and then I'll fix those other pieces. I'm not going to pull off the masking for a little while, but you can see from this angle what color this is going to be. It's a really, really bright orange. I think it's going to look awesome, except that I didn't really think about the orange in contrast to the cherry. I don't think it's actually going to stand out quite as much as I was hoping, so before I get to this part, I'm actually going to finish up these edges and then probably paint this entire thing, maybe white, just so that orange will really pop off of it. So once I get this painted, then we'll move ahead. This video is brought to you by the Maker Alliance, and if you're not familiar, that is the awesome community of people that support I Like to Make Stuff through Patreon and YouTube membership. Now we try to do a lot of stuff for the Maker Alliance. We give discounts on merch and plans, they get to see videos early, we try to give them behind the scenes updates, but the bigger thing is the community. The Maker Alliance has turned into an awesome community of makers that support each other, they share resources and ideas, they help each other out, and most of that happens through our Discord server, which is pretty awesome. And once a month we always get together in a Google Hangout, spend some time together, and everybody gets to show off what they're working on. It's an awesome community of people, and we would love for you to be a part of it. So if you want to find out more, go to ILikeToMakeStuff.com/join and come join us. Here we go. So I got some white paint on this thing. It's finally dried after quite a long time. And so next up we're going to put a cover on the front of that, and I'm going to put a piece of plexiglass here so that you can see everything happen on the inside. I want to make sure that I get this thing fit before we work on putting these pieces on the inside, just to make sure that I don't run into any problems putting in screws into this little 1/2 inch material. So we got to trace this out, and we're going to cut that on the table saw. You can cut plexi or acrylic or whatever with a regular table saw blade if you want to. You just have to go really slow, but it does kind of melt the plastic and sometimes will chip it out. I've got a specific plexiglass and plastic blade, and this thing works amazingly well. It's kind of a pain to change the blade just for one cut, but it's really worth it. Rather than trying to cut a 45-degree angle with that blade on this like small tip, I'm just gonna try to score it and break it. That'll probably work fine. All right, so I got that piece cut down and I sanded a little bit on the edges just to get it nice and smooth. Now that I've got it in place, laid on the top in the correct position, I can make some marks where I want to drill holes to add screws. Now drilling through, especially close to the edge of a piece of acrylic or plexiglass, you gotta take it really slow, use a very sharp bit, and don't try to just like pound through it or it's gonna splinter, it's gonna crack from that point. So we're gonna have to take our time with this so we don't have to start over with this piece. Next up, we just have to put the whole thing together. So we've got that cover that will go on last. These pieces are gonna end up looking like that, which is gonna be super cool. And luckily, this acrylic has a little bit of flex to it, which is gonna be good because I have to put these posts in these holes, and then the gap in between the posts is gonna be exactly what it should be. So I have to bend these pieces to get them in between. Then they should be good to go. So let's take off all this and test that just to make sure that they fit before we keep moving. So next up, got to pull off the rest of the masking on these, and this process is called weeding. And it takes a while, especially for something intricate like this. But if you were to use something that has an adhesive that's stronger than the adhesive on this tape, like Gorilla Tape, it will pull this all off really quickly. Check this out. So you just lay down a stronger adhesive versus if you were to do it by hand, you start to pull it and it's going to tear and you have to go back and get all the individual pieces. Not terrible, but you know. All right, can I get the whole thing in one piece? All right, so the next thing, I guess kind of the last thing, is to put the front on this thing and test it out. But to figure out whether it works or not, I have to figure out how to prove if it works or not. Like, what are the standards here? What's the metric that we're gonna go by? I don't really know. So I'd be interested to know from you down in the comments how you would gauge whether this works or not. Is it just because it catches certain things? Is it because it separates to a certain amount? I don't know. I think it's gonna do what I need it to do, but I'm curious if it would do what you need it to do. So here's the finished product. We'll see how it works, but I went ahead and temporarily mounted it to a board with a French cleat. Now this is gonna end up going on some new Lego table that we're gonna work on in the future, but for now, it's just gonna hang right here so we can test it out. So I'm gonna put the first container underneath it, and then I scooped up a big container of just random pieces, so we're gonna put in a little bit at a time, see how it works out. Now the idea for this in the long term is to be mounted on the side of the table, so you can just kind of push off little bits at a time over this edge down into here and then handle it, shake it, all that stuff. So we're kind of not doing that here. We're just dumping in a bunch of stuff from the top, whereas normally you would put in a little bit at a time and separate it out. So how did this thing work? Overall pretty well, but I definitely see a few things that could be improved. I definitely now understand why people make the big bends, the larger areas to do this, because you physically just have more space for the pieces to fall through. They don't bottleneck as much and get stuck. But having a thing that hangs off the side of the table is going to be really handy in the future when we build our new storage system for all this stuff. So we're gonna stick with this design. But I think if you really just need to sort a whole bunch of them, having stacked trays that are much larger with many different size holes is probably the way to go. Either way, this was a good test and actually pretty easy to make. It was kind of fun putting the combination of laser cut and 3D printing and all that type of stuff together. I think it looks kind of cool. If this gave you an idea for something that you could use with your Lego system or just something else that you enjoy, I would love to hear about it down in the comments. We've also got tons of other types of projects, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And it worked perfectly for my kid, Ready? I think Lego has actually even made a really awesome version of this in make sure that some things version of this same idea on Instagram by buying